You ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Need to bring my apple crate to stand on.
Now what did I do with my damn... Oh, pen's right in front of me. Snake had bit me. 31. And we're good here. Say something for me, please. 4 years ago.
4 years ago.
All right, perfect. You ready?
Yes.
Here we go.
I don't know if I had enough coffee, but I hope I
The
have.
unit is self-contained with its own saddler, farrier, wheelwright, and so on. It's a rigorous
Video's
training
on.
dished out who
Yes.
know all there is to know about horses, and it brings results.
We take you behind the scenes now to show just some of the interesting aspects of this training.
Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein, the best podcast to create sounder horses from the ground up. Mike Stein is a registered journeyman farrier with an APF1 accreditation. This week's show, 5 basic hoof shapes as identified by the late farrier Scott Simpsons, and also what constitutes for a healthy frog, and finding the center of a hoof versus the center of articulation. All this and much, much more will be discussed here on Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein. And over to my far inside is Mike Stein. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Travis?
Doing all right. So what have you been up to this past week or so?
This past week.
Yes. 7 days ago.
7 days ago. That was a long time ago.
For some of us.
Yes. Yes. Now, I've been having a few horses with some laminitic flare-ups. We've gotten a little bit of rain in areas. We've got some pasture coming up. And in this part of the country, we have more late summer, fall flare-ups than we do in the spring. Part of it's because people are thinking about it in the spring. In the fall, not necessarily. And pretty much most of these at this point are chronic cases that are having reoccurrences.
Now, here on the property, we have 4 horses, and we normally do like a Timothy or Orchard fescue, whatever, hay. I don't know. My wife tells me get that hay and throw it out to the horses. But it's rich from my understanding, and we've actually backed off. We normally do 2 flex per horse, and because of, like you said, the grass and everything and these thunderstorms that are coming through, we've actually backed off for 2 reasons. One, price. I mean, a price of a square bale is like $15 now. And yeah, it's amazing how much they can get for grass.
But with the kind of money you make, I don't see where that's a problem.
And the second thing is because of them putting on a little bit weight, because they are getting nutrients and stuff out of the grass or their pastures that they have right now. Now, something we're getting ready to do is reseed one of the pastures where the mare, which is going to be a brood mare. So I guess from my understanding, you're not allowed to have fescue at all if a horse is getting pregnant or in possibility of it getting pregnant?
Yeah, there are some problems with the fescue with brood mares. And also you have some endotoxin problems that can head towards problems with laminitis with fescue. So we're in an area where we're kind of on the south end of it. If you go a little further south, you start getting into Bermuda grass. In our hot areas, you start seeing some Bermudas. But yeah, there are some issues with your brood mares. There are some issues with laminitic horses, and it sounds like you're going to get into something to make money.
I'm not sure if we're going to make money doing this, but you never make money with horses. You're always, you always lose money.
It sounds good on paper.
It does. You try to come up with some kind of business plan, and at the end of the day, you're sitting there and you're looking at that red number at the end, and you're like going, "How did this happen? How did this happen?" Now, you were talking about the grass coming in the pastures and worrying about your horses eating too much and being laminitic. You mentioned something. We were out downstairs below the studio here, and you were saying something about a muzzle, a grazing muzzle. I've never heard that expression, and I've been with my wife for over 14 years now. And
she's never put one on you.
No, she's not.
Okay.
Sometimes she wishes she could put one on me, but I mean, a grazing muzzle, what does that do?
Well, it slows down the eating.
Physically, how does it work? Does it keep the horse's mouth from? I think of like a chastity belt type thing.
I don't think it works quite like that.
Okay.
It's close, but not quite. No, they can still move their mouth, and what it does is think of a bucket over the end of the muzzle, and it's got holes or slots in it where they can get some grass through, but they can't get as big a mouthful.
So it's like a portable hay bag on the horse's face.
Kind of, except it keeps the hay out.
Yeah, you don't want as much hay
You
out.
don't want as much hay out. So they have to eat through it. So it slows down the intake. And you're doing right by cutting back on its overall caloric intake. And when your pastures are coming up, they're getting more grazing. You need to look at your grain. You need to look at your hay. You need to look at everything else you're feeding the horse, because you're not controlling what they're eating out in the field. They are, unless you're putting a grazing muzzle or something on them. And if you've got a horse that is too heavy, has been around with laminitis problems before, they are more prone to have problems. And we don't want to get back into that, because, you get repeat each time you get a little more damage, and we don't want to go down that road. And it's how are you managing? It's management. So there you go.
There you go. All right, guys, we got a big show to get into. Make sure you follow us on your YouTube channel. Search for Equine Dynamics Mike Stein. You can see for every podcast we do, we have a matching video. And we've got the live streaming up and running here. We're going to have a couple guests on the show later on this year, during this season. So make sure you subscribe and hit that little bell. I know that sounds so cliche, and I hate to say it, but yes, I understand now. So when we go live with any guests that you might like to see on the show, subscribe over to YouTube as well. All right, guys, stick around. We got a big show to get into. You're listening to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein. He'll be right back. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, you ready?
Yes.
I'm going to pull this article up here, and I'm going to switch cameras. What camera am I going to? I'm going to 6, I believe. Yeah, go to 6. All right. We're going to talk about the shape of the hoofs.
Right.
Okay. Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein. He was the official farrier in 2018 for the World Equestrian Games. And you can ask Mike any question. And the way you do that is to go over to equinedynamics.com. At the top of the page, hit contacts, fill out that little form there, ask Mike a question. Make sure you put podcast in the subject line so he can decipher between all the other emails that he gets throughout the day. And put your question in there. We'll answer it here on the air, and put your return address as well so we can send you out some magnets, some stickers. Where's your button that you had that I got you the other day?
It's on my suspenders.
Okay.
It's on my suspenders, and I have a box of them in the truck.
Oh, all right. And Mike will send those out to you if you send us a question. We read it here on the air. Now, Mike, we're going to get into the 5 basic hoof shapes as identified by the late farrier Scott Simpson. Am I saying that right, Simpson?
Simpson, yes.
Now, don't forget, for every podcast we do, we have a matching video, and you can see this in real time as we're talking about it here on the show. So let me switch cameras here, and we're going to these right here. Now, Norman, Stubby, Spike, Tag, and Ralph. Tell me about these different shapes and what each one of them means.
Well, Scott did a good job of patterning feet, and other people have gotten into it. We come up with some similar patterns. And this is kind of what you run into. Now, where this kind of comes in as far as training your eye, if you're doing like a eagle eye contest, where you have so many seconds to look at a foot, you got to figure the size of it, and you got to build a shoe for that foot.
So this graph that I'm looking at here reminds me of, remember High Times magazine, or I'm sorry, High Life magazine, Highlights magazine.
I have 3 different magazines from you.
But the one that you see in like the doctor's office, and they always have the 2 pictures to pick out the difference between the 2 pictures.
Right.
So I'm looking at every single one of these, except for Tag that I'm looking at here on the screen. Every single one of these looks exactly the same.
No, they don't.
Well, to your trained eye, to my novice eye, no. And the more I look at them, I can see a little bit more difference in between. But yeah, they almost all look the same. But yes, a trained eye would notice a difference.
Right. For the most part, the Tag is normally more of a hindfoot, kind of a diamond shape, except for on, everybody has this idea of the perfect Mustang foot. That Mustang gelding that I have, he's got basically 4 Tag feet on him, 4 hind feet. Now, he has no problem with soundness. Or is this normal for most horses? It's a normal shaped pattern of a foot. So normally your front feet are going to be more like the top row, And then Ralph is kind of a foot where you've got a half and half split. You may have a spike / Norman and split it down the middle. And what you do is you look at medial side, lateral side, and if you're building a shoe, you get this basic pattern in your head. You get the size of steel you need, and they set the timer, and you cut your steel, and you start making a horseshoe, and you get that picture in your mind, and that's what you build to.
And I see Ralph here does have like a little bit of wobble on the left side,
Right.
as to the right side's a little bit more tighter in there.
Right. And, you know, the Ralph foot, I would say, would probably be more of a hind foot, but there again, it can be on the front. And you have some horses with some odd shaped hind feet also because of limb alignment, tendon ligament issues, or whatever, where you may have a foot that might end up being a little more like a spike foot on the back end.
Now, out of all these 5 different patterns, the Norman, the stubby, the spike, the tag, and the Ralph, which one is more likely to give you more issues or common issues? Like, oh my God, you know, you've got a Ralph or you've got a tag or something like that.
Which common issue? There's a lot of common issues.
Yeah, I know. It was kind of a loaded question there.
Right.
But I mean, which one gives you the most problems, or, you know, oh, you don't want to have a stubby foot because that one's more likely to have blank, blank, and blank.
Well, if you got a foot that falls into like cutting, you know, your clubby categories, when I get where I could talk, I'll say it. You know, those horses, you'll tend to have problems like around the tip of the cuff bone, thinning down, and not get enough mass between there and the ground. But then on the other end, if you go to more of a Norman shaped foot and you've got a low slung foot where you go to flat, negative palmar angles and that sort of thing, you also run into, especially on your thoroughbred type feet, more thin soles and probably a flatter foot. A stubby probably would have more cup to it, be a little more upright. There's no perfect anything. It's going to be a little different with different breeds. You're going to have a heavy-footed warm blood that is going to the foot's going to react a little different than your light-footed thoroughbred. You know, with looking at the hind feet, if you look at you know, one that is more of your Ralph, I would say, when the horse moves out, you're probably going to get a little more limb rotation over a horse that would have a hind foot more like tag. And, you know, you're going to have movement patterns that build around the foot. You start looking at feet, looking at horses move, you can start predicting a little bit of how the horse is going to move out after you've seen this. Now, for horse owners, Scott Simpson is well worth looking up and reading up on. He did some great stuff. And when you're balancing feet, you know, they always talk about finding the widest part of the foot. Most of the front foot patterns is going to be fairly center. Some of the back feet, that center wide point is going to be a little bit further back. And that gets into some of our next discussion.
Yeah, the farrier takeaways that said you have to understand the shape of what you're creating before you can even make it to an anvil. Every shape of the hoof exists on a horn. Learn these arcs and use the horn as a die to build the efficiency of the flow into the shoe shapes. And also the horizontal line on the horn is important because it can and will move as the stock is being turned or bent around that horn. So there you go for your farriers out there.
Right. And he's talking more for you know, fabricating, building, modifying shoes or that sort of deal. But even on your barefoot horses, and there's a lot of them out there, and some people are maintaining their own horses, you'll start learning how each foot will react a little different.
All right, guys, stick around. When we come back, we'll dive into what constitutes a healthy frog and why are horse statues built the way they are with 1 foot up and 1 foot down. All this and much, much more will be discussed here on Equine Dynamics. Stick around. Mike Stein will be right back. Boop. Boop. Doing all right?
Yes, sir. Let me get...
What's your whistle? So my peach tree out there, I got 4 gallons of peaches. I cut them up and froze them and stuff. And then my neighbor came over and he had 2 5-gallon buckets and filled up. So that tree was picked dry with all the peaches and stuff.
Wow.
That's the first year we've had it, though. We've had the tree for 5 years. Like year 3, we got like 4 or 5 peaches. And then this year, I mean, it was loaded. It broke 2 branches.
Right.
That's how heavy they were.
Good year for it.
Yes, good year for it. All right. Ready?
Yep.
Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein. He was the 2017 American Eventing Championship farrier. And make sure you like him on Facebook. Follow him on all your social media by going to Equine Dynamics. Search for Mike Stein as well. We're on YouTube, and for every podcast we do, we have a matching video. There's Mike waving to me and me waving to Mike. And make sure, if you have any questions for Mike, you can fill out the little form over at equinedynamics.com. Put podcast in the subject line, and we'll send you out some magnets. Make sure you put a return address on there. We got some magnets, some stickers, and some lapel buttons that Mike's showcasing over there on his suspenders.
Yeah.
Well, he took the suspenders down so he could see his logo. Now, Mike, you ever done any like sightseeing road trips or anything like that? Gone to like historical cities or anything?
Occasionally.
And sometimes, usually like near a square or a roundabout or where the cars are driving all the time, you always see like a soldier, like a Civil War soldier or a vet on a horse. And sometimes that horse will have 1 foot raised up. Sometimes it'll have him on his hind ends with both feet up. Sometimes it'll just be standing on all 4s. Do you know that what they're saying is that there's symbolism based on how many feet are off the ground and how many feet are on the ground, depending on the...
It has nothing to do with that one may have a sore foot.
I don't know if that's the case. But what they're saying is, here's the claim. The number of horse hooves lifted in the air on the equestrian statues reveals how the horse rider actually died. Well, this is kind of false. Well, it's 50-50 false, 50-50 true. Folk wisdom says that the equine statues contain a code where it would tell the rider's fate can be determined by knowing how many hooves are raised in the air. The most common theory is that if one hoof is raised, the rider was wounded in battle, possibly dying from his wounds later on, but not necessarily so. 2 hooves in the air mean he died in battle. All 4 hooves on the ground says that the rider survived all the battles unharmed. Now, technically, this is false. The reason why this came to be is because of the statues in Gettysburg. All the equine statues in the Gettysburg area followed this code.
Right.
And then later on, they searched all the horses statues. Washington, D.C., having the most horse statues in the air, said that 10 out of the 30 followed the same code. But they also say if he was a Confederate soldier and he was facing north, that means he died in the war. And if the horse is facing south, it's all this different things. He survived the battle and went back home to see his family type deal. So it's kind of true, not kind of true. Just if you ever hear someone say that out there, it all depends on who's telling the story and what that story is.
That tends to happen with a lot of things now, doesn't it?
It gets lost in translation. Now, being lost in translation, what constitutes a healthy frog outside of the ones that I got sitting down by the pond?
Well, looking at a frog, you got healthy frogs at the pond.
I got lots of healthy frogs at the pond. I hear them every night.
Right. One thing you can do is looking at frogs.
Now, first of all, tell me what a frog is on a horse.
On a horse.
Yes.
On a horse. Gotcha. The frog is, you got the wall around the outside edge of the foot. You got the sole, which wraps around behind the wall. Mm-hmm. The bars are where the wall come in and turn in, and in between the bars would be the frog.
And how did it get that name, or is that just...
I don't know that one. I don't know where that came from. It's been there.
Someone told someone said something.
Someone said, and there you go. Somebody probably has the answer to that. I do not.
Well, if you got the answer, make sure you email Mike Stein over at equinedynamics.com and tell him your answer as far as why it's been called a frog without us having to Google search it.
If you take a pair of wing dividers, in the very back, very center of the frog, there's a distal ergot, some people call it a frog stay. And if you measure on a healthy frog the length of the cleft, if you take the wing dividers and flip them, you should measure about where the length of your frog should be. If it's stretched forward to that, the frogs can narrow up and stretch forward. If that front part will stretch, pretty much all your stretch is going to be up there. So that then you said, well, it's stretched forward, and that kind of goes with a contracted, low-slung foot. The width of the frog, if you take that and you measure across the back of the width of your frog, it should be relatively close. There's some people have some different numbers on that, and a good healthy cleft where it's not separated, you don't have a big split down the middle of it, and because that's an area you can get some infection, and depending on the conformation of the foot, that can be a little bit of a problem area of infection, And when I'm prepping a foot, it's kind of different for a shod horse versus a unshod horse. On an unshod horse, if I've got a good callus on there, I'm probably going to keep most of it. I want to go down either side of the frog, and I want to find the base, because that's my best determination in the field quickly. Do we have depth to the foot or not? On your how deep you fill in with a hoof pick or hoof knife. In a domestic world, I'll clean that out some, and I'll bring it all the way back, because I don't want any trash traps in a domestic horse. Now, when you're trimming a frog, people do have a tendency to lay the knife in at a real hard angle sometimes. Well, the frog itself, the plantar cushion is more closer to straight, dips down, come back, and pretty straight down. So think about that when you're trimming the frog. You should go through there, but you get these flaps that fold over and out, and you remove those flaps so you not have infection. If you've got a horse that's out on the range, they'll pack dirt in there, and yes, nobody's cleaning them, but they're not living in a domestic environment, and they're not standing in their own feces and all that sort of deal. So we want to keep that where we can maintain it and keep a healthy foot as far as any kind of infection in there, and that's the reason that you do prep that. But, getting the proper dimensions of the frog tells you, because, an ideal foot, you've got the frog should fill up about 2/3 of the foot. So if you take your wing dividers, find your frog stay, measure up through the cleft, flip it, find about where your tip of your frog should be, flip it again, find the front of the foot. But then if you've got a foot where that front part can be an inch and a half, and I've seen some this big where that front part of the frog is close to twice as long. And then you figure, well, that's 2/3 of where the foot should be. And you start figuring out the front of your foot off of that. Because I look at a foot, I build from the back forward instead of from the front back. When I was taught that, I looked from the front back. But I've learned that most of, you prep the back of the foot and then start working forward from there. But if you're looking at that, say, well, I've got 2/3 of the frog, it's 1/3, 2/3, and that frog is elongated, well, that throws everything else in an odd place. So that's something that needs to be thought about when we're prepping a foot, whether shod, unshod, or whatever.
I always get scared when my wife grabs that pick and starts, picking out the frog. I always think that she's going to hit some soft tissue in there or something. Cause she gets that thing in there and just like rip. And you see like dirt and clay and rocks come flying out of there. If you cut down a frog or you shave it, you said, angle the knife just right. Is there something in there, the equivalent of like what a dog has a wick, and you cut off the toenails and you don't want to hit that wick
right
at the end? Does a frog have that exact thing?
Yeah, you can, if you lay your knife in too far, you can draw blood, and you're thinning it way down, and you're paring away at the plantar cushion when you go in that deep. As far as her going in there with a hoof pick, that doesn't bother me if you see what I do to it. They feel pressure. There's pressure receptors in the frog. The pressure receptors, when it comes into the ground, activates. If you look up the proprioceptor response, it makes a difference in how the muscles in the upper leg and the shoulder or make the hip respond as the horse is changing ground conditions, because they can go flying off a hard pack into mud, and the horse is not going to lose their footing. And they're going to their body is instantly going to change. And part of it is they're actually feeling the pressure change through the back part of the frog. If you look at the frog that's been wet, there's a bunch of little holes that will form in the frog, and those are actually where your nerve endings come down. Now, at that point, they're pressure sensors. They don't really feel pain. So I'm not too worried. If your wife's frog is to the point that she's going to draw blood with a hoof pick, we've got some infection problems that need to be taken care of.
So those out there, pick them with your frog picker. Keep an eye and make sure you're not drawing any blood, because that's a first sign of something.
Well, you got some signs well before you start getting blood.
Oh, okay.
You'll get the smell. You'll get the black gunk you're pulling out of there. You'll get oozy stuff you're pulling out of there.
Gross. Everyone eating lunch right now.
Everybody's eating lunch. And bring your crackers, because that stuff's good on crackers.
Stop, no.
But that you're going to have some signs before you get to that point. If your horse's feet are being maintained on a regular basis, you shouldn't have that problem. Honestly, if you're cleaning the foot before it gets nasty, every now and then you get a little air to it. That will take care of a lot of it before you start hitting it with any kind of treatments.
Now, before I met my wife, I knew a little bit about horses. That's one of the first things my wife taught me when we first started dating. She would grab that horse's foot and start picking it out. And that was like one of the first things she would do after riding, after taking off all the, the gear and everything, all the tack. That's the first thing she would do even before she brushes down the horse, is clean those frogs out.
Right.
So that's like a beginner entry level for what I know.
Well, that's what you need to know. And is that your job now?
I've never done it, only because I'm afraid of picking up the horse's foot. And I've seen, I wouldn't know what to do. You got this hoof of this, 1,000-pound animal cradled in your hand, and you're picking it. I'm just afraid of horses. Let's put it that way. I'm afraid that I'm going to get stepped on, pushed, or the horse is going to buck or do something crazy because I'm doing something wrong.
Right. And if you're afraid of them, that's exactly what will happen.
Yes. So it took me a long time to move the horses from the stables out to the pastures. So all I know is I'm supposed to stand on the right-hand side. That's all I know.
Unless you're on the other side of the horse.
Why am I on the other side? Aren't you supposed to walk with the horses? You're the walker on the right side of the horse at all times?
Well, yes, that's the way we train them, and there are some historic reasons why we do that. Most people are right-handed, the way they mount, whether you would carry your sword, so you can go on, load on and off the horse, right, and the whole bit. But really, if a horse is well trained and quiet enough, you should be able to lead a horse from either side. You probably should be able to mount from either side.
All right. Well, I'll have to work on that. That's my homework for this week. All right, guys, stick around. When we come back, we're going to find out what the center of the hoof is versus the articulation of the center of a foot. Stick around. You're listening to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein. He'll be right back. You okay?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Let me get a swallow.
Just a little.
We'll go back at it.
Just a little. Losing you. I'm trying to get those nice fancy banners in the picture too.
Well, we got banners. And they can see my logo on there.
Yeah. Ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein. Now, I messed this up last week, so this is the correction. You are now a licensed thoroughbred farrier through the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission. Did I say that correctly this time?
Yes. I think it's pretty close.
All right. And make sure you follow Mike Stein on all your social networks. And the way you do that is search for Equine Dynamics Mike Stein. We have a YouTube channel. Make sure you like and subscribe, Mike. Your numbers are increasing every week. I go in there and I look at the numbers, and 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 people have joined like every week. And those numbers are creeping up. And
we have 35 people?
No, adding another 30, 40 people on top every week. And we appreciate all you guys.
We're past 5 anyway.
We have at least me, you, your wife, my wife, and then some other guy is out there listening to us. Those are the 5 people we started with.
Right, yeah.
And don't forget, we do reach out all the way across the water there. Every time I post a an episode of Equine Dynamics with Mike Sine. I see over in Singapore. I see a lot of people in France. So we appreciate all our overseas listeners as well. Unfortunately, we can't send you out any magnets or anything, but we do appreciate all your support over there, and also a big fan base over in your old stomping ground over in New Zealand and Australia.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, a lot of people over there, a lot of downloads over there. So we appreciate you guys as well. Now, Mike, we're going to talk about finding the center of a hoof as to the center of the articulation. First of all, I know what a hoof is. Tell me what you mean by center of articulation.
The center of articulation is working around the coffin joint. And reality, when we're balancing a foot, we are working around that center of articulation. Now, externally, when we're finding the widest part of the foot, we're kind of trying to find the center of the mass of the foot. And when you look at that center of articulation, if you've got a upright foot versus a low slung foot, that center of articulation is going to be at a little different point as opposed to the center of the mass. Now, ideally, what we're trying to do is find the center of that joint and drop a line down from it. But if you drop that palmar angle or stand up that palmar angle, relationship to the widest part of the foot is a little bit different. If you,
I know I'm scrolling through. I'm scrolling through pictures here, so people can at least when they're watching the video, they can see what Mike's talking about here.
When I'm working at the widest part of the foot, there are several equations on how to find your way there. If you clean out to the medial side, what I'm looking at is the inside of the lamina, more to the medial side. If you draw a line around it, you slide your rasp across, but it should be the last little bit to disappear. You can use your wing dividers, measure your frog, go to your tip of your frog, work your way back from there. That'll put you close. I'm not going to go into detail on all that right now, but there are about at least 4 or 5, a dozen more ways to figure out where the widest part of the front of your foot is. The quickest way is with a ruler, probably. But then you look at, X-rays. And the last couple of weeks, I've gotten several X-rays with the vets that I'm working with. And if you look at the upright versus the more normal relationship, and you look at where that lines up over the base of the hoof, it's in a little different location on the low foot versus the normal foot versus the upright foot. Now, when I'm shoeing a horse, we've got to start taking that into consideration on where we're placing our support and what kind of a lever arm do we have from beneath that joint to the front of the shoe, and at what point putting support becomes compression on the back of the foot. Because if you start running it too far back, you can start crushing things with the length of the shoes as the lever working against the foot. So you want to work in a range to get enough pressure off the tendon that the horse can come over and come through without torquing between the hoof capsule and the coffin bone itself. You're looking at leverage reduction. And there are a number of ways out there that people have come up with, mapping, with drawing, with laying out the shape of the foot, that are all interesting to look at. I would encourage you to look at many of these measurement programs and kind of go through them and see where they're landing. A lot of them are going a different way to get to the same spot.
So this one right here, this diagram that we have up, has what is that? Medial lateral balance, the white line distortion, solar. I can't read that word right there. Frog, balance, bar, trajectory, and all that. And so is this something that you use here, or is this just one of the styles of finding out the center?
That is one of the styles of finding out the center. The yellow line that's set inside of the white line.
The solar, this right here, the SC right here?
Right.
Okay.
There are a few ways to kind of figure that. You can take, these deals that you kind of press into molding to get the shape of the molding you get at the hardware store.
Yeah.
If you take that and press it into the coronary band and then line it up on the base of your foot, and bring it back to where you got an even line around there and draw you a line, you're probably going to be fairly close to the perimeter of the coffin bone. That's not something I do on a daily basis. You'll see the texture change in the foot itself. And, you know, when you look at thousands and thousands of feet, no, I don't sit there and measure that out and draw that out. In fact, when I was really starting, this whole concept of mapping feet was more, if it looks like a duck, you treat it like a duck, you know, and the whole mapping deal came across as far as trying to find a better way to teach people. And then, you know, after thousands and thousands of feet, you start learning to go more by feel, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
So, you know, you run off your gut. And, you know, in my situation, I see a lot of x-rays with the different clinics I'm working with. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you see the foot, you see what's going on. One of the best teachers I ever had, I guess, really was broodmares. There was a time when I worked a farm that sometimes would have upwards of 200 horses on it. Every other week, I got to go there to trim 40 horses. And I spent a lot of time crawled up under old broodmares and everything. And with the added weight, those feet change quick. And every trim technique that I could pop up out there, I got to try on those broodmares. And you went through, and then you start seeing which ones would react certain ways. And this works on this type foot, this works on that type foot. It was a great place to learn. People that are trimming their own feet, I tell them, you ought to find you a herd of broodmares to work on.
And trial and error
A little bit of trial and error. You don't want to cause any pain to any of them.
Right.
But on the other end, you need to see how things respond. And those feet with the added weight and all that, they're going to change faster than your gelding's feet out there that's out there barefoot.
It's kind of like being a Sandlot mechanic. You know, you're just
exactly. But those, you know, working on a bunch of old broodmares, those broodmares will teach you a lot about strange things feet do. And you know, you see, well, you take out all the bars, you leave in all the bars, you do this, you do that. Every now and then something pops up, and oh, this is what we got to do to all feet. Well, that's not so, and they'll start teaching you what feet you can and cannot. Real quick, especially when you got that number of them.
Yeah.
And, you know, they would breed horses. I think about the biggest, I remember about 210 horses on the farm. Every other week you go up to do about 40. When we started working on the yearlings to go to the sales, we'd start making extra trips in for them. And then we'd drop down to 50, 60 horses. And you still stayed on every other week, 40 horses to trim.
Wow. Just you? Or you got just you?
Just me.
Jesus.
Yeah.
That's a lot of upside down work, Mike.
A lot of upside down work. Kind of tells you something, doesn't it?
It does. All right, guys, stick around. When we come back, we got one more little segment to get into, and we'll let you get back to enjoying the rest of your day. You're listening to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein. He'll be right back.
40, when we started working on the yearling.
All right, I just want to make sure that for some reason I had this, I was messing with the cameras, and the cameras themselves have microphones on it, and I just want to make sure that I turned them all off, and we weren't getting a double voice. I can hear you just fine here, but when it records it, I just want to make sure I didn't get a double voice. I'm like, I don't know if I turned his camera microphone off. But no, we're good. I did.
Okay.
You know, it's one of those, you probably ended the same thing. You do something, and it's, you know, muscle memory. You just do it, and you know what you do, and then you sit back and go, did I turn the coffee pot off? You know, that type of stuff. You ready?
Yes.
All right. Welcome back to Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein, the best podcast to create sounder horses from the ground up. If you have any questions for Mike Stein, email equinedynamics.com. At the top of the page says contacts. Fill out that little form there with your question. Make sure you put podcast in the subject line, and we'll send you out some magnets, some stickers and stuff. Make sure you put a return address on there just to say thank you for listening to us and sharing us and getting your questions in. And Mike and myself will answer them on the air, hopefully correctly.
We'll give it a good run. We'll give it a sound good.
Sure. And over to my far right hand side is Mike Stein. How are you?
I'm doing good.
All right. So what did we learn today, Mike? 5 basic hoof shapes as identified by the late farrier Scott Simpson.
That is something that, you know.
Hold on. The first one, it's Norman, Stubby, Spike, Tag, and Ralph. It's weird that he calls them these names, or that's what he came up with, instead of just, you know, the weird scientific name, like whatever. But
Well, Scott made it pretty scientific.
Yeah.
The way he got there.
I think Stubby's a good scientific name for that hoof.
that is, and normal is probably more of your normal average foot. Stubby, of course, it explains itself. And you get different variations of every foot. It's definitely something that people need to look at when they're working with their horses and start realizing different feet. And we will handle each foot a little different. And then there's Ralph.
My buddy Ralph, who's the egg shape.
And then, Ralph.
He's got a little wobble to him.
Ralph's got a little wobble to him.
Also, what constitutes a healthy frog?
Good, clean frog. Not having infection problems. Not overly stretched overly far forward. I'll get where I can talk. A good width. Look at your frog stray or ergot to the cleft. Look at the length. Look at the width. You can use that as a gauge to kind of tell where you are in relationship to the width of the back of the frog to the overall length, and start getting some dimensions in there as to what a frog's dimension should be. These extremely narrow, extremely stretched out frogs. Well, when you start, if you're measuring off the tip of the frog to see where your foot is, that's a whole different story from the frog that is nice as dimensions. And when we're looking at where the front of the foot is, we need to think about where the frog should be, not where it is when one is distorted.
Here's a side note that it just popped in my head. Is it recommended, or do you, of course you would recommend it, to getting an experienced farrier to come look at your horse or look at a horse before you purchase it? For example, we just bought this new gelding out here. I don't know if you were involved with, going out there and literally kicking the tires and looking at the horse's foot and saying that, no, you're going to have problems with this horse because of A, B, and C.
I could kick him, but he kicked me back.
I mean, outside because you get vet checks on them, but they don't cover as far as the depth of the shoe itself or the hoof itself.
They should.
They should, okay.
They should, and depending on the vet you're getting, because let's look some of the discussion we've had off on the sidebar, some vets are well versed in equine podiatry.
Okay, so that is
Some
part
are
of
not.
this is part of the check. So make sure that you're
Some are not.
right. Make sure your vet's
A lot are not as well as probably should be, but that falls for us as professionals in the farrier business also. Having a vet with some good hoof leg experience that has had some training in that podiatry area would be a definitely plus when you're getting a vet check.
right.
Unless you're hiring somebody to look at your horse somebody else is going to buy. Then you want somebody that's not going to look real close.
I don't know about that. All right, and last but not least, finding the center of the hoof as to the center of articulation.
Right. You got to start paying attention to where the center of the foot is when you start prepping a foot, shod or unshod. You got to start thinking about where the center of articulation is as opposed to the center of the foot. If you got a low slung foot and that articulation is dropped way back, we've got to start thinking a little different on how we prep that foot as opposed to one where the center of articulation is closer to that widest part of the foot. And that's kind of a floating scale in there because of like angulation of the foot, low palmar angle versus an upright foot versus everything in between. Every time that changes, it changes that dynamic between the center of articulation and the center of the foot.
All right, guys, we'd like to thank each and every one of you for listening to us, downloading us, and being part of our show. Make sure you follow us on social networks, and the way you do that is search for Equine Dynamics with Mike Stein. You can follow him on Facebook. You're posting a lot of interesting articles over there on your Facebook feed. Make sure you like and subscribe to him over there. And don't forget, for every podcast we do, we have a matching video. You can find us over on YouTube as well. And Mike also has that 4-part series with Ray Morris about learning how to massage your horse. A gentleman by the name of Ray Morris, a blind gentleman out of New Zealand. 4-part series. Check that out as well. On that note, guys, we're going to let you get back to enjoying the rest of your day. On behalf of Mike Stein,
Thank you. Y'all have a good one.
my name is Travis Holmes. See you next week.
Just close your eyes and dream.
We survived.
That was good.
I don't. I can't bear it. I cannot bear listening to myself.
Lucky. Good night, Ned.
Night, Dusty.